Hello, everyone out there in digital land. I am Nick, the Director of Events for Mysterious Galaxy, and it's a pleasure to have you either for the first time or for the billionth time for one of our virtual events. Today, I am here with two wonderful authors, Ray Nayler and Robin Sloan. Hello, gentlemen.
Hey.
How are you both doing tonight?
We're great.
Very well.
Happy book release week, by the way.
Yeah, thank you. It's like I was saying in the green room. I'm just trying not to read any reviews. So
I mean, these days, especially with the internet, that is fair. That is very fair. Yeah. For those of you who may not know, Ray Nayler is a critically acclaimed short fiction author who has appeared in many magazines and anthologies, including the very best of the best, 35 years of the year's best science fiction. That's a lot of years and best. Mm-hmm. For nearly half his life, he has lived and worked outside the United States in the Foreign Service and Peace Corps, including a stint as environment, science, technology, and health officer at the U.S. consulate in Ho Chi Minh City. Wow. So it really makes sense then why you wrote the story that you kind of did here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And of course, in conversation, we have Robin Sloan. His first novel, Mr. Penumbra's 24-Hour Bookstore, very good book, by the way, was a New York Times bestseller, translated to more than 20 languages. And his latest novel is Sourdough. If for anyone out there who hasn't bought yet The Mountain in the Sea, what are you waiting for? Get on it, which I have right here in my hands, which I must say I love the details that they did for your book. This is, I love stuff like this. And the raised circles right here on the cover. It's very tactile. It's very tactile.
It's a beautiful book. I'm really happy with it.
They did your book justice.
Yes.
If you click the link below, they'll take you to our website, and not only can you buy The Mountain in the Sea, you'll get a signed book plate while supplies last, signed by Ray Nayler. Also, you'll see we have Robin Sloan's books on there, too, to give a little love to our conversation partner. A little love around. Your purchases helps the bookstore continue to do wonderful events with wonderful authors like these. And lastly, before I disappear, if you have any questions you would like to ask later in the program, there is a button below that says Ask a Question, and you will submit those questions, and they'll be answered later on in the program. All right, I did enough gabbing. I will see everyone later in the program. Until then.
Thank you for that introduction. I've had the pleasure of visiting Mysterious Galaxy a few times in person, and it does not escape me that next year will mark its 30th anniversary. So this is an important institution. This book, The Mountain in the Sea, is a book about the near future, about many different kinds of minds, human, animal, virtual. It's a thriller and a mystery. But I want to start here with what's inescapable, which is these signs, these glyphs that adorn the book's cover and its pages. This is a book with octopuses in it. I don't think that's a spoiler. It kind of has been marketed and promoted as the great octopus novel. And as the story unfolds, maybe one of the surprises is that we learn a lot about octopus language, about octopus script. So I want to dive pretty deep into this, Ray, because of course this is like the core fantasy science fiction dream. This is full Tolkien world building down to the letter form. So let me just start by asking you, where in the process did these glyphs come into this project?
So first of all, thank you. Robin, you were, as I was saying also in the green room, Robin was like one of the first people to like strangers to say really nice things about my book, and that blog post that you did about it was amazing. So basically what happened was this. I've always been the kind of person. So I say that when I was a kid, most kids would say why, and I would always say how. That was always my question. So how is that done, and how does this work, and how could that be true? So every time I was confronted with something like dragons, right, I would be like, well, how does a dragon breathe fire? How could it do that and not get burned? What's the mechanism, etc. The inspiration for the book was pretty simple. I had seen a lot of first contact films and books and things like that. And because it was an alien species and you could make everything up from the beginning, you could sort of do whatever you wanted with the language. You could and how the creature that you had made up communicated. What I wanted to do was to kind of flip that on its head and constrain myself to a basically real animal, and then think, if nature was going to give the octopus the ability to communicate symbolically, which is what separates human beings from the rest of the animals on the planet. It's not consciousness, which they have. It's not sentience, which they have. It's not, language, which to some degree they have. It's really symbolic communication. If one of them was going to achieve symbolic communication, if an octopus was going to do it, how would it do that without interfering with other processes? And so the idea that it would be able to make shapes on its skin and that these would be the symbols came after some period of thinking about how this would be done. So the octopus, when it hunts, quite often will use this technique called the passing cloud. And what the passing cloud is that the octopus will pass a shadow across its skin very quickly, again and again and again, in order to startle crabs and other animals into moving so that it can see them against the background and attack them. When I was thinking about what the octopus might use as a mechanism for communication, I thought, well, this is a thing that could be exapted. You can look that word up later. It's always marked as a spelling error by Microsoft Word. The octopus would have exapted maybe to use for language. So that's kind of where the idea came from. And then from that, I had to figure out sort of what my base would be for the symbols, and that would be a spoiler. So I won't get into that.
Yeah, right. So the way you described that was so fascinating and so organic. It does make this process sound fairly like neat and sort of but of course, you see, I solved the equation as neatly as Newton. As you're working through that puzzle, were there false starts? Are there notebooks that have sketches that are scribbled out? What was that kind of iterative process to arrive at, I guess, what we might recognize as the shapes that are so beautifully printed in this text?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I had written so I did a lot of that work in a different space. I had written this novella, which I had to put aside because it had too much overlap with the mountain and the sea, about an alien species and communication with an alien species. So a first contact novella, and I had developed an extremely complex apparatus for communication, and it was also somewhat based on cephalopods and that kind of thing. And thinking about how complicated that was sort of led to this, like in this very kind of, this was more of a whittling down from a much more complex idea that had existed in another space.
Yeah.
So, and trying to think about, how the limitations of the environment, light underwater, all of these other things that would interfere with using, say, color as a means of communication, that kind of thing. Colors, of course, change according to how many meters under the surface you are. And so, what might be one word at 10 meters, if you were relying on color, would be a completely different word at 20.
Right. One of the pleasures of the way this unfolds in the book, and I think it really distinguishes it from Tolkien or other sort of Klingon, these full linguistic systems, is that almost like there's mysteries where the real traditional mysteries where you the reader could figure it out if you were smart enough. I do feel the sense that we as the reader are here on the page sort of puzzling through this, and in fact have the ability to, certainly at the same pace as the scientist characters in your novel, kind of learn it as well. Closing out this, you can tell I'm just preoccupied with this question of sort of the fun of new glyphs and fictional languages. If someone emailed you and said, a friend emailed you and said, "Hey Ray, I'm thinking about putting a fictional language and some cool glyphs in my book. What should I be thinking about? What should I be avoiding? What's your pithy advice to a would-be language inventor?"
So my advice would be that they need to study. Well, they ought to be reading semiotics and not things strictly about language. They should be reading books that are about sign systems and communication writ large, because reading books about grammar and language is kind of misleading. So they should look a little wider. I would say that first. Secondly, I would say that what they should keep in mind is that all symbols have a ground, usually in indexical relationships, but it can be difficult to find it. A really good example is, and here's one of those, like, now you've got a story to tell your friends at the bar. A 4 is written like half an 8. And if you look at the letter 4, you can see that, in fact, the letter 4 is just half an 8, slightly turned on its side. And if you look at old dates on buildings, for example, from the 14th century, it'll look like it's almost says 1888, until you realize that the first 8 is not quite complete.
That's great.
Right? And that just shows you how symbolic language, I mean, the 4 is just a symbol, seems completely arbitrary, but it's not. It actually has a kind of indexical relationship to other symbols. So I would say if you look for that grounding, and then you want to build a language of glyphs or whatever, that's the place you should start.
Right. Well, that's another theme of the book. It's the way that octopuses, but also other kinds of characters and minds in bodies kind of relate to the world around them, and sort of the instruments they have to do that with, whether it's virtual or real or tentacular or whatever else. And I want to come back to that, to the kind of profusion of minds, but again, front loading all of the stuff that gripped me the most, and that I would want to hear about if I was just someone tuning into this. I want to ask you about the villain, or not the villain, but a villain, a great villain in the novel. To me, I think that this entity is an instant classic. I mean, just indelible, like Darth Vader level, truly. And how to say this without spoilers? I will be cautious here. I think it's safe to say, because it emerges early in the book, this entity is the AI captain of a slave ship. And that entire strand of the story is bleak and terrifying, in part, of course, because it's real, or at least partially real in our world today. But the part that's perhaps not real is this captain who, I think you would say never speaks, and in fact is never actually seen. So Wolf Larsen, AI captain of the Sea Wolf, silent, implacable, computational. Is this the picture of villainy in the 21st century, Ray Nayler?
So for me, Wolf Larsen, right? The AI, and I didn't imagine Wolf Larsen as a being. So what I imagined was that the AI captain, so to speak, of the Sea Wolf is in fact the entire like pilot cabin of the Sea Wolf. Like that entire structure is this being, that part.
And it's and it works that way because it is unseen. All you ever see is a door, this sort of opaque, ominous door.
Yeah.
Phenomenal.
So for me, it's so I think it's probably not too much of a spoiler to say that this book has 3 sort of loops in it, like plots. There's one which is Dr. Ha Nguyen studying the octopus on the island, and that is a through line. It's basically a straight line, a progressive plot. And then there are 2 loops. One of them is Rustem, who is this hacker hired by an organization to break into some sort of AI system that he doesn't, that is more complex than he's seen before. And the second one is this slave ship. The 2 loops for me are both about systems, right? And also and people's response to systems, and what the response to those systems causes, right? And what the systems cause. So for me, I would say, okay, to answer that question, the implacable, one-way glass of the 21st century is a system, right? To which we have no access, which is whose desires are completely opaque to us, whose calculations we don't know, who is completely a black box, and who is demanding things of us that are, harmful to our health. I mean, it's not like
that's terrifying, Ray. Yeah.
Yeah. It's,
And yet, I will say, as you talk about both of those systems, the Rustem system world, and then of course the world of the sea wolf. Again, no spoilers, but part of course, the reason it's a novel that we can read and be captivated by and follow along with is that things do happen, but and in part because humans with cleverness are able to kind of juke these systems. They can do clever things. I don't want to say much more than that, but is that only in the I mean, not to make you into some great prognosticator or prophet, because I know that's no fun and not very comfortable, but is that here in the novel because you think it's real and it's a kind of juking and swerving and hacking that all of us ought to be doing, or is it in the novel because that's the only place that can happen, and so we might as well get to enjoy it here?
It's gonna sound strange, maybe, I don't know. Depending on what your take on where the novel ends up. I'm very much an optimist, actually. I really am, and as dark as I think things are, I inherited maybe from my grandmother, who was from the Ozarks and grew up extremely poor, and kind of escaped that and ended up living a decent kind of middle class existence, but never lost her like just really rough edges. She would always say, whatever happened to you when you were complaining about it, she would just say, get over it. And she didn't mean this. Interestingly enough, she didn't mean this in a negative way. What she really meant was like, whatever it is that's happening, like just keep moving forward, right? And so she would just say like, okay, like, so that happened, just get over it. Like, meaning like literally not to forget about it, that it happened, but to like just climb over that fence and keep, making trail, right?
Yeah.
And I think that Dostoevsky said, right, that a human being is an animal that can get used to anything, and that is the best definition of him, right? And I think that is true, but I would also say that a human being is also an animal that will continue to resist everything, right? There's something in us that won't sit still, and whatever the system is, we're going to be sort of vibrating up against its walls forever. And that's why I always find sort of end states to be the most improbable thing in fiction. Like I'm not a big fan of dystopias,
right?
Precisely because a dystopia for me is an end state, right? And I don't think that such a thing exists. If people were born into dystopias, then that's just life, and they will take it as it is, and they will be just as happy and just as sad as we are in our lives, right? They will find a consistency in their world. They'll find a way to find joy in things, etc. So I think that human beings are incredibly hardy, and I think that's sort of what Dostoevsky meant. It's at least how I would interpret, that. I think he was, of course, a much more of a pessimist than I am, but I think there is this kind of existential positivity that you can have, right? Where it's like the worst thing they can do is kill you, but at least you will have done something like before that happens. And I
don't know, Ray. They could put you on a slave ship under the supervision of a AI captain, implacable and silent. It's interesting that you said human beings so many times in your kind of argument there. And of course I don't disagree. At the same time, the novel, I just think of it as part of this strand of exciting, I was going to say new literature. I don't know how new it is. It feels new to me. But a literature that insists on narrating in like phenomenal fashion other minds and other lives and other kinds of things on this planet that are like also trying to get by and overcome things and solve problems. So we've of course we've introduced the octopuses, the ship AI. There's like at least 4 more kinds of minds. Humans are one, but there's even in the humans, there's great diversity there. And so, in some ways, even though this book leads with its tentacles, I think for me, at least as a reader, and especially as it kind of, glows in my memory, it's kind of a survey of different kinds of thinking, different ways of being in the world. And there are so many, in fact, and it sometimes feels so systematic that I started to wonder if there had ever been like a chart on Ray Nayler's desk. It was like a matrix of, different kinds of minds. I'm like, okay, I got to make sure I cover them all. It would be a real shame to leave one off. That's fanciful, obviously, but I am curious to know how this cast, and there's too many to go through here, but there's this incredible kind of cast of characters, all with their different way of being in the world. Did those all kind of get injected into the story organically? Was there a sense of a systematic survey on your part? Like, how did you assemble this crew, this motley crew?
I don't think it was completely so there's never anything totally systematic about my writing, and I can give you a really good example, and I don't think it's too much of a spoiler because it happens very early in the book. But when Ha meets Evrim on the beach, until that moment actually happens, I had no idea who or what Evrim would be.
Evrim, for folks who haven't read it yet, Evrim is you discovered it then, and now you'll tell folks what is Evrim.
Yeah, so Evrim is an android. He's possibly the world's first and last android, and that was not something that I expected. So I write very early in the morning, about 5 a.m. I get up, and while everyone else is asleep, I try to knock out about an hour and a half, 2 hours if I can get away with it. Of writing. So I write a little bit in this kind of like fugue state, right? That you wake up into like really early. And I'm not a morning person, but this is just the only time I could find in life to carve out, from life when everyone else is sleeping. And so my writing really happens kind of, I have this bunch of ideas that I start with, but once I get rolling, I don't really know what's gonna happen. And when I'm plotting things out, I'm usually plotting them out 3 or 4 chapters ahead. But the characters really do start to control what's going on in a book a lot, and I mean a lot. And also like not just the characters, but the tone, the mood that I'm trying to set. The mood will start to set plot points and things like that. So, I mean, it's very fluid. But I did know this. I was having a trouble starting the book. And after that scene happened, then I realized what I wanted to do with this.
Awesome. That's great.
I was like, okay, all right, now I understand what this book is about. And I knew the whole octopus thing that I wanted to do. I had that kind of a little mapped out for myself, all that stuff. But it wasn't until Evrim appeared that I understood that this could be a book that there was enough for a novel.
This is the majesty. This is majesty of science fiction as a craft. There's Ray Nayler at his desk saying, yeah, I know all about the octopus thing, but what is this book about? What is it really about? Yeah, the android. That unlocks it. Okay, so here we are with Mysterious Galaxy, incredible institution of genre and more. Thinking about that and thinking about yourself as a member of the science fiction reading and writing community. I know you've published a lot before this in other formats and in magazines and things like that. When this is going to sound a little abstract or philosophical, and I don't really mean it that way. I mean it in a fairly material way. When you think about publishing a science fiction novel, that for sure has this beautiful print incarnation, there's a great ebook as well, but like this is a big part of it. What does that mean to you? Like, is that something that for you has always been publishing in this mode, in these formats, in this genre, has always been kind of like just a shining goal on the horizon? Is it random that you found yourself here? And do you think you would personally be as happy to be publishing The Mountain in the Sea as a, holo film in Evrim's world, or does this matter in some way to you?
That's a lot of question, Robin.
I'm sorry, and also not. I like I said, maybe it was more philosophical than I thought, but
no.
But in part, I think it's meaty because of the moment we're in. It's because of the year 2022, and there's just a lot kind of.
So I feel like I'm very different from other writers for a number of reasons. One of them is that since I was 27, I lived outside the United States. So I grew up in California. I was born in Quebec. My first language was French, and then I grew up in California after moving there when I was 3 with my mother, who's from California. I left at 27 and joined the Peace Corps. So I went from having never left North America to Turkmenistan, where I lived for 2 years. And then from Turkmenistan to Moscow, and then all over Central Asia, Afghanistan, Tajikistan, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan. Finally joined the Foreign Service in 2010. And I stayed overseas. I went to Vietnam, working in Ho Chi Minh City, and then to Kyrgyzstan again, and then to Azerbaijan, and then Kosovo. I just got back at the end of July. That's 19 years outside of the United States. And so that gives me a very different perspective on the world, I think.
Yeah.
And one of the things that you'll notice about the book, which nobody's really brought up in detail yet, is America is only mentioned one time, and it's a joke, right? It's when Altan Setseg basically says something about Americans, and otherwise it's not ever mentioned.
That's phenomenal. Right? That's phenomenal.
And that comes from just having been abroad for so long. But even before that, I've been incredibly isolated from writing as a craft. I've never had a writing group that I was a part of. I never got an MFA. I never took a creative writing class. I've never had a workshop that I took part in. Nothing. So it's always been this extremely solitary early morning activity for me, I kind of conducted alone.
Yeah.
And that, I think, for me, I was determined that I was going to do something with it. But the something with it for me is to be to get across something to people, to communicate. It's a communicative act. And for me, what's really important, and I really mean this about the book being big, like it seems to be pretty big right now, which is great. I want a lot of people to read it because I want to communicate.
Yeah. And
I think that that's important. The form, I mean, I think we have the forms that we're given, right? I like to say when we talk about like technology, right? That we have this fantasy as human beings all the time that like we invent things. Like you and I didn't invent shit, right? We were thrown into a world in which technology was already as it was, and largely other people are inventing new things which we have to adjust our lives around, or which adjust our lives for us, etc. But the encounter with technology is not a mastery most of the time, right? We have this idea, I think, especially as Americans, as if like we invented the telephone, like us, like all of us together, like it's ours. It's not. Like we were just born into a place that had this in place. So the novel is what I have, right? And that it's a technology. Everything is a technology, right? I am an odd, perhaps, user of it. I never expected that this book was going to get published because I never expected to get an agent. I just expected to try my hardest and fail, which is usually what happens when you try your hardest. But I got very lucky. So, and here we are.
Here we are. Right. And somebody in some dark room somewhere is figuring out how they're going to do that. The octopus tentacles with CGI. Is it going to be practical effects, puppets, 8 puppeteers? It's all problems.
I hope it's puppets.
Me too. Hearing you, that's fast. So first of all, I thank you for highlighting that. It's almost it's not an Easter egg, or it's like a reverse Easter egg. It's an Easter void in the novel and America's role. And I think that sort of anti-parochialism and that truly global view is so powerful. It makes me think of a writer. I had jotted this down because it was in my mind the entire time reading the novel. there's a writer named J.M. Ledyard who has published with our shared publisher MCD in the past, although they were not the publisher of his novel Submergence, which I would put on a shelf with The Mountain and the Sea. I think they'd make great companion reading. At the time that novel came out, he was kind of pitching a genre, maybe, that he called planetary writing. And here's his little pitch for it. I'm curious to know if this resonates with you, if you recognize your own desires and kind of intentions in this. He says planetary writing is not the same as nature writing. It's more political, more discarnate. There is on the surface a narrative where human lives are played out and they matter so very much and are insignificant all at once. What I wanted to do was alter the reader's perspective of Earth to show that dirt is precious, but seawater dominates. And to step out on a field is actually very rare, while to float and scintillate with bioluminescence is common. So this is planetary writing, a way of sort of reordering our sense of what the heck we're doing here. What do you think? Does that, I mean, if you found out that Sloan's bookshop of Oakland, California had a shelf called Planetary Writing and we had filed The Mountain and the Sea there, would that seem correct to you? Would you say no? No. Yeah. That'd
be a great place for it. No, I mean, I like that idea. For me, when you talk about like other minds, right? The question that kind of keeps coming up to me is, so I think what allowed me to write this novel, just backing up a little bit, is the experience of 19 years of being misunderstood. I've learned several languages. I've made an idiot of myself in all of them. It's incredibly easy to make an idiot of yourself in Russian. I have a friend who did it in front of hundreds of people when he said that he worked for American councils. Well, so he said Американские советы по международному образованию instead of образование. So he said that he worked for American Councils for International Circumcision instead of education. And he got this look like, and you can say things like, in Russian, you can say, в американском хлебе есть много презервативов, right? Meaning there are a lot of condoms in American bread. Right.
It's quite comic. I love it. It's tragic comedy. Yeah.
Yes. So I've made a fool of myself trying to communicate a lot, and I like to use one example about miscommunication. If I said to you, as an American, we were sitting at like across the table from each other, and I said, I don't get along well with my mother. You might think I was oversharing a little bit or something like that, but you would probably be pretty receptive to that. You'd be like, okay, like a lot of us don't get along with our parents, or
sure,
it's common enough, all that kind of stuff. So if I was in Turkmenistan and I was sitting across the table from you and I said to you, I don't get along well with my mother. What I've actually said to you is, I'm a person that cannot be trusted because I don't even understand what is sacred in life and what is not. I don't understand the most fundamental bond that a human being can possibly have, which is to their parents. And I would tell a stranger that I have problems with people that I'm not allowed to have problems with.
Right.
Right. You should never speak to me again. Avoid all further contact with me and just make sure that you tell everyone else that you know not to speak to me. Right. That's what you really have said in Turkey. So,
yes.
I mean, that's a really good example of like, how is it that we think we're going to easily communicate with an alien species when we can't even easily communicate with someone from another country quite often, right?
Right.
We can't even easily communicate half the time with our own families,
Right. That's phenomenal. I'm of course no one has accused Star Trek of being truly hard science fiction, but I have been watching part of a slow rewatch of Star Trek Deep Space Nine, and there's a lot of Federation of Planets politicizing, and hearing you say that does make the whole thing. Right. We gotta tell a different story because it's way too easy for these planets to all say, hey, great, bagel, beer, let's go, let's do it. You're like, no, that's not how this is going to work out. So first of all, let me just say, it's fascinating that you come to these dramas, these, pageants of communication, at least in part through miscommunication and a whole taxonomy of miscommunication. Do you find when you think about your own imagination and the other stories that you have written, the things that you think you'd like to write one day, the ideas that preoccupy you, is that the center of gravity? Does it have to do with beings talking to each other or making themselves known to each other, or is that just one lobe, and there's others where you want to talk about food or I don't know, politics or whatever?
I think there's a thread that runs through all of my writing that is probably in some way about communication, but it would be not probably recognizable as such from the outside. Like I don't think you would pick up you would read 10 short stories of mine and say, oh, clearly Ray Nayler's work. Now you will, because I've let the cat out of the bag. But
nice,
anyway,
perfect.
I don't think you would say, oh, these are all stories about communication.
Okay.
I think you would think that the stories were about something else. But I mean, I think communication is a thread that runs through it. It's not only that, systems and the injustice of systems is a thread that runs through it. The resistance to systems and like systematic injustice is a thread. I mean, there's just a lot of stuff that a lot of them are thought experiments. I'll give you a good example. Is I have several stories, and they're all available actually on my website for free.
Great.
In a series that I call the Disintegration Loops series. There's the Disintegration Loops. There's a Rocket for Demetrios. There's a story that's kind of a sideline called Father. Rocket for Demetrios is a novella, and basically these take place in an alternate 1950s in which the United States won World War II, but with technology that they discovered on a crashed flying saucer in the 30s, and then used to basically annihilate everyone who was against them. And so now you have this world that's completely unipolar, with a very strong America that basically beat the crap out of the Nazis and then continued all the way to Moscow and then into China and just made sure that there was no one left to resist, the West. And the whole point of the story is sort of asking, well, what do you do with that, right? Because it's the same America. I mean, at the time in the 1940s, they're just trying to fight Hitler but then it starts to kind of metastasize this unilateral power that just grows and grows and grows, right? And the fact that no one else has this tech.
Phenomenal.
So is that a story about communication? I mean,
right. Is Disintegration Loops, is that named for the Disintegration Loops by Basinski, the great music, the 21st century piece of music?
Yeah.
Deep Cuts. There's another one. Yeah. There's no mysterious Galaxy Bookstore link to this one, but folks should go and look up.
It's amazing.
It's
exactly that.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. That's great. I have some more questions myself. I'm going to save them for the end because I want to dip into some of the questions folks have asked here. And for everybody watching, I'm just going to encourage you. This is your moment. Pitch it in, and keep in mind that you can ask Ray about his background, his novel, octopuses, really. And literally anything else. What is it like to release a book in 2022, this weird age? So here's a great question from Inger, and I think this actually could open up an interesting sort of avenue in terms of your research and preparation. But Inger asks very, very simply, have you ever met an amazing octopus in person?
So I have been diving a lot. I have seen octopuses in aquariums. You don't see them very often when you're diving because they're very good at getting away from you, and they're probably very good at being right smack in front of you too, without you seeing them. I've had a close encounter, which really was like a close encounter while night diving on Condau with a cuttlefish. Like a lengthy encounter in which the cuttlefish was like clearly pretty interested in what the hell I was doing in his or her home at that time. Yeah, I know, wanted to cuddle. Duh, good. Good on you. And, So I have had that, but with an octopus, no. I have not in the wild ever managed to see one.
I mean, it's a rare thing, rare intelligence. There's another question here about your sort of research process and whether you. I should back up a moment and tell folks watching and listening that one of the things I'm so grateful for in your acknowledgments, you give a whole reading list. Kind of you stock a shelf for us with the nonfiction books you read about octopuses, but all sorts of other things. How forests think. This really great cutting edge sort of writing and work about other minds and other ways of being in the world. And so there's like this whole bench of things that you read and call out here as like really crucial influences. The question asks, and I'd like to know too, were there things that you dived deep into for this book that in the end just didn't find a place here among this, panorama, and either sadly fell on the cutting room floor forever, or that you're, gonna put in your pocket for a future project?
Oh yeah, there were a lot of those. But I think that, so there's the acknowledgments in the back of the book, but if you go, so recently I wrote an article in LitHub, and LitHub actually has a link to a bibliography that I wrote for the
great.
So there's like a whole, list of other books. There's always, I think there's a lot of, it's not so much that there are ideas that end up on the cutting room floor. It's that when you're doing the research, you're reading 10 books for every one that is useful to the story. And quite often the other 9 books are just to ground you in something, right? And it's not that something is going to come out of it onto the page, but it's just going to give you like a better knowledge yourself of the background. It for the reader, it'll never show up, except that it's going to add hopefully to that verisimilitude, and that sense of seamlessness that you're able to insert. I mean, for example, God, I read a lot about Alaskan fishing boats and about accidents on fishing trawlers to understand how one of them sinks.
Yeah,
and like and what how yellowfin are gutted and stored, and like all of these. I mean, just like a lot of weird research on fishing boats. But I also, I because I was environment science, technology, and health officer in Ho Chi Minh, I also spoke with people who had been enslaved on fishing ships. Yeah, and this is the only fictional part of that is really the AI. Yeah, everything else is basically things that are going on right now. Right now, tens of thousands of people are enslaved on fishing ships all over the world. So this is a very a very real thing. And that's kind of where I'm at as a writer. I try to keep it as grounded as I can because I want to satisfy that kid inside me. And that kid inside me was really skeptical, right? He really wanted to know, like, okay, so you breathe fire. So how do you not burn yourself? Right? Like,
that's great. I'm delighted imagining the spectrum of readers, particularly fantasy science fiction readers, with the sort of the legalistic. You said on page 3 that the level of flame was 7 on one end, and Ray close to that. And I wasn't. There's the other end, which is kind of like, I didn't really care in the first place to get on with the story, and that's on the other end. But I was somewhere in the middle. I was not so demanding of the fictional logics.
I think it depends on. So for me, it's like it depends on what you're watching. Like for example, and I think the only time. Well, okay, maybe it's not the only time, but like one of the only times in a Star Wars film that I really got offended was like right. It was like the part where they like bombing the ship, and the bombs are like dropping out of a ship onto another ship, and then they fall, and like they're trying to get the bombs out. You're like, I just feel like you're supposed to just hand wave at the fact that you have gravity in space, not just point it out to people.
Point it out, show an indication perhaps that this was a fundamentally different kind of project. They were up to something different, and it probably wasn't planetary writing.
I'm a big fan of taking things for what they're supposed to be, right?
Yeah, that's right. Do you? I'm sorry. A question just occurs to me now as I think about this: how much of the material of your book is grounded in the here and now. I might be betraying my own weakness and forgetfulness as a reader. I don't remember there being a date. Is that right? It's not pinned down in a year, is it? No.
No,
So
there's no date. I just don't want to have written 1984 and have it be 1985 and everyone going like, "Oh, you didn't do this."
Yeah, that's great. No, it's very, but it's very well done. At the same time, but there's nothing dreamlike or unspecific about it. It's very specific in every other way. One more question from the chat here, and then I'll kind of finish up with my own most important query of all. Susan Tunis asks, I was a child of the 70s, the heyday of interspecies communication experiments, from John Lilly to the ape language experiments. So there's not much research going on these days. Do you think communication with a non-human species, one, has happened yet? And then two, if not, is it going to happen in your lifetime? That's an awesome question.
So I will give a somewhat complicated answer. I'll say this. So if you look at human culture, right, and you sort of take it from the very beginning until now, I think what you find is, first of all, what we think of as human culture is continually interwoven with animals. Animals are a part of human culture. They have been a part of human culture for a very, very long time. Animals that we hunt, animals that surround us in our environment, animals that adapt to the things we've done to our environment, animals that we use as service animals, animals that we keep as pets, animals that are pests, right? Horses, right? And if you think about the animals that are woven, densely woven, tightly woven into the fabric of human existence, right? What you will quickly realize, I think, if you think about this for just a few minutes, is that we have been communicating with animals for the entirety, probably, of human history. And they have been communicating with us. That many of us have pets, and we engage in sophisticated levels of communication with those pets every day. What animals lack is an emerged capacity for symbolic language. And what symbolic language does, right, is, I don't want to sound like some didactic professor, so, excuse me if you already know this shit. Like, but what symbolic language is, it allows you to completely detach language from reality. That doesn't mean that animals don't predict the future. Predicting the future is what everything with a brain does. That's the purpose of a brain. It's to imagine what would happen if you do this, right? And anything with a brain is actually a future predictor. That's the mechanism of brains. So saying that animals can't talk about or imagine the future is clearly false.
Right.
We know they can because they get nervous about things that haven't happened, right? Anyone who's moved a cat, right, and then pulls the cat container out of a closet and can't find their cat for 3 days knows that cats can predict the future. Yep. Right. They can make pretty good guesses about what might happen. So I think that the answer that I would give is, one, we are densely woven into animal cultures that are woven in with our own culture. We have been communicating with horses, cats, dogs, crows, many kinds of birds, all sorts of animals around us for a very long time. We are not probably often smart enough to understand what they are thinking and what the questions they're asking of us are, but we are definitely in communication with them. Number two, even the highest apes, even when they spend their entire lives around human beings, have a very, very poor ability to emerge into symbolism. Yeah. And the reason for that probably doesn't have to do with anything except for a lack of a culture that has emerged into symbolism. And that's what I attack in the novel, basically. Right. That's the novum, right? Is an animal that achieves symbolic communication. Can we learn to communicate with animals? I think we should just learn to listen a little better, to the animals around us and see what they're saying to us. Like when animals flee in terror from us, we should be listening to that communication, right?
When you talk about symbolic communication as this sort of, actually when you put it that way, it sounds so strange. It's communication completely ripped out of the sort of cradle of the real, of the material world. It makes it sound actually quite scary. And it makes me think of the real AIs, these, it's a bit generous to call them AIs, these language models that have been much in the headlines lately, which of course learn, air quotes, scare quotes, learn based on huge, vast swaths of text. Importantly, nothing in the real world. They, for better and for worse, they learn about the world by reading The Mountain in the Sea and Mr. Penumbra's 24-hour bookstore, and about 20 million other books in many languages, and then are able to sort of do these tricks of what seems like at moments reason and prediction and sort of fluency and everything else, but there's something really actually quite scary and impoverished about an entity, I don't know what to call them, a thing that has learned to speak without ever even knowing there's a real world out there to refer to. And so you have, it's like we have the, maybe, I don't know, maybe this will be, I was going to say maybe this will be The Mountain in the Sea part 2, where we find humans as this sort of strange pivot point between the animals in the world and the AIs that are forever trapped outside the world. So yeah, let me ask you to sort of close out here, and perhaps for the folks in the chat who have already read the book, it's only been out for a few days, but a book like this, it doesn't take much longer than that to tear through it. You've set up an expansive world with this novel, and even though things are not always, or not often, sort of, and just to be totally clear, here's what's going on here, and here. In its richness, it gestures in all these really, really kind of provocative directions towards all these things happening in this world. And it definitely felt to me, at least as a reader, like there is or could be unfinished business in the world of this book. So, I mean, assuming a commercial logic is there, just take that for granted. Have you, Ray Nayler, contemplated continuing the story? Is that on the agenda, or is it on to something else?
No, I already wrote something after this and sold it. So it'll be announced at some point soon, and it's not
exciting.
Not in this world. And the thing that I'm working on right now is also not. But I would say that most of the worlds that I create feel quite often as if they are almost like there's a lot of overlap. I'm a big fan of this idea that I don't want everything to line up perfectly, but I do have some commonalities to the ways that I think about the future and what it's going to look like. So a lot is always going to be recognizable, but people shouldn't think that, for example, a mistake that people have made in the past is that if I have 2 stories set in Istanbul, they're the same Istanbul in the same world. Right? I would only return, I think, to this if I really felt like I could.
Okay.
And I don't feel like that right now. I feel like this book kind of said what I wanted it to say and did what I wanted to do. And I would have to have this many new ideas.
Yeah.
In order to make a new book. I can't just take the ideas that are already there and extend them out into another book, because it wouldn't excite me enough to write it. I have to have the emotional motivation to write the book. I can't force myself. And so I'm just not capable of doing that. I can't just produce, I don't know, mountains in the seas.
Another mountain in the sea. Mountains in the sea forever. Yeah, there's many options.
Right. Or reboot it. I don't feel the impulse to go back in there.
Yeah, I understand. Well understood. I mean, for what it's worth, I just do want to cast one vote for the simple. Sometimes readers are just simple and stupid, and I want very badly to know what happens to everybody. The folks. Well, yeah. I can't say. I'm not gonna say anything. No, we're gonna get through this without any spoilers. But at the end of it, I was thrilled and satisfied, but also still hungry, which is of course a great feeling. I think that's it. I think that's gonna wrap it up. Ray, thank you for this book, and thank you for taking 20 years of life and thinking about communication and systems and injustice and building it into something so compelling and just a real joy. It's
Robin,
terrific.
Robin, thank you so much. I really have to say, I love it when a book finds its ideal reader, and you certainly were that reader. It's a wonderful feeling, when you when the communication works, because it really is a two-way communication.
Yep.
It's just that you're not in the same room. And I loved reading what you wrote about the mountain and the sea, because I was like, man, like Robin Sloan got it. He got me. He understands me. It was a great thing. So thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. This was a great conversation.
Wonderful.
I'll never forget it. I really appreciated it.
Oh, thank you so much for both of you for being here. We really appreciate it. Ray, congratulations again. I'm so glad that your book was able to reach out into the world and didn't remain on the page. Your page at home or wherever. Don't forget, everyone, if you haven't yet purchased your own copy, you can click the link below. That'll take you to our website where you can get that. We'll also still have, while supplies last, some signed book plates from Ray. And you also notice there's links if you want to purchase any of Robin's books, which you totally should do as well. We ship across the country as well as mostly international. Some weird countries, cannot. Weird rules. All right. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great evening. Bye.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.